Hi, I'm Jo Kane, and my guest on One on One today is Sam Mahon, author, artist, very passionate about the environment. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Jo.
2006, you wrote the book The Water Thieves, and prior to the September earthquake, the big issues in Canterbury was all about water quality and quantity, and the demise of Kane. Since 2006, when you wrote about the water, and you were it was quite compelling on the role of the government, the role of the regional council and the role of councils. What's changed?
Nothing much has changed, and that's the problem. The change, if there is any, is in our attitude to how to make change. So instead of rolling up to a Minister of the Crown or to ECAN or any of the organisations that have taken its place and making endless submissions, we're tending to try to go straight to the public now. So my role as an artist and as a writer is to try and make my work digestible, I suppose easily digestible, by the people whose lives have been run by criteria that aren't really all that important. But most people are so engaged by life now, they haven't got time to worry about the environment. And when I was 17 or 18 years old, when I was at university, if something like the ECAN Act had happened to us, there would have been thousands of people on the street. One of the big questions we ask now is, why weren't the people on the street? What's happened to us? Have we become a totally acquiescent society? Is there a disease that's running through the nation? So my job as an artist is to create metaphor. That's what artists do, that's what writers do. We create metaphors. And if we can then take what has happened, make it into a metaphor, metaphors wake people up and present those to the public. So if there's been any changes between when I wrote that first book and now, I've become much more cynical. And
more cynical?
Oh, much more cynical, yeah, because we've seen too many of our friends just worn down. I mean, take your position. You were on ECAN. We spent 6 years to get 4 councillors who were conservationist minded. They weren't radicals, just to get an even balanced voice onto ECAN, which we thought was being pushed too far into a developmental corner. We put those 4 people on. The minute they got on, Nick Smith came down and took them away again. We lost our forum for our voice. And the one precious thing we have in society, in a democracy, is a voice. If you get your voice taken away, you have every right in the world to become angry.
Nick Smith, though, has recently come out at the Environmental Defence Society's conference saying that National is making real improvements on environmental issues, and he's really proud of the New Zealand freshwater policies. Now, they don't have any standards. They sheet all the responsibilities back home to the regional council. Huranui is the love of your life, but it's not only just the Huranui, it's rivers. What's your feeling? Well,
I've always felt that if you devolve responsibility to regional bodies, you'll have problems because they have a parochial view. I've always thought, wouldn't it be great to have an EPA, have everything centralised in government? The trouble with an EPA is it gets captured. So what we find now is that with Nick Smith saying to the commissioners, you can choose whatever water quality standard you want. The trouble is those commissioners were put there to take away all the judder bars to massive irrigation. So obviously they're going to set the bar way too low from our point of view. I think what Nick doesn't realise is there's a simmering anger in society. We saw it in Cathedral Square when we built the Kane 2 Junes ago. Now
tell us about the kiln. Is it still standing?
It's still standing. But just to explain what that was, yes. we had lost ECAN. We had lost any way of getting up we found we had no formal forum on which to speak to government or speak to people or to make any kind of change. Yeah. So we went to Cathedral Square, which was the place where people have always gone to. They've gone to the square, to the town square, to make their protest about whatever happens, even if it's just burning witches, which we haven't done yet, but Margaret Maisley, watch out, right? So we asked people to come along. We did it the old-fashioned way. We used Facebook to invite people to come. We also sat down and said, look, let's just put flyers on people's letterboxes and get them to come to this place where they can speak how they feel about water. We printed out 200,000 flyers and put them into houses all over Christchurch. I was amazed by that. Old people came, young people came, to give their time to put flyers into letterboxes. I did 2,000, took me 4 hours. Again, I was amazed by the quantity, the number and the heart in people to come out and fight for clean water. In Cathedral Square, on a bitter, cold day in June, we had 3,000 people who each took a river stone and built a cairn to their lost rivers in the middle of the square. Now, you can't get to the square now, but I've seen photographs. We've got Godley Down on one side, we've got the cathedral spire down on the other, we've got the cairn still standing there with these beautiful river stones. and with names written on every stone, the cairn that is the only real public work of art because it was built by the public. Yeah.
So do you just said yourself people are tired and people angry. So have you given up the fight, Sam?
No, we just have to find different ways to fight. If you're in a boxing ring with somebody,
Yes.
he's the same weight as you, but you have your hands tied behind your back. You'd be a fool to carry on fighting there, wouldn't you?
Yes, correctly. The Environment Protection Authority, which is what you talked about, the EPA, has no clearly defined environmental goals. I mean, does that concern you?
Well, of course it does, and again, it's just capture, but everything along the way has been captured. ECAN has been captured. The zone committees in my district where I live, I don't know how aware people are of the zonal committees in Christchurch, but in a big community of a huge area of the Waiao Huronui zone where I live, we have a committee set up who are supposed to represent people who are intimately involved with the Huronui River. Now, it doesn't matter if those people come from Christchurch or from Cromwell. If they have some intimate association with the river, they should be represented on the zone committee. But they're not. The zonal committee has been stacked by people who just want irrigation, basically. There are a handful of people there who are the token conservationists, I suppose, but they're outnumbered. So again, we see a process that has been captured. So I don't take any part in that. To take part in it would be to make a compromise which would say, well, Sam's happy with the zonal committee. He didn't get his way, but at least he was invited on to
Did you stand for the zonal committee?
Yeah, I stood for the zonal committee. Yeah.
Okay. I went in and had a look at the implementation program that they're just out. Well, it was out for draft. Yeah. One of the concerns that they have in that is that recreational and environmental interest groups who don't live in the region are carrying more weight than those who do. Do you think that it should be just about those people that live in a region have the vested interest in the rivers?
No, I've never understood that parochial view. To say that the river belongs to you because it happens to run through your community is outrageous. Queen Victoria vested the rivers and lakes of this country in her people, not into the property of farmers. And that was a big deal. Ask John Eklund about that. Get him here. Interview John Eklund one day about that. You know, he's the chair of the Access Committee. He can talk about the history of why we had riparian margins along our rivers in the first place, because those rivers belong to us, the people. Now, if a small area like Harden or Waikari is to say that river belongs to us because it passes our gate, is just as ludicrous as to say that State Highway number 1 belongs to us because it passes our gate, and that we can annex part of it or we can take part of it away. Yeah. But they just don't get it.
The community don't get it?
The community don't get it. And what bothers me is you can put information in front of people at any time, but when people have blinkers on, have a closed mind, you won't get anywhere. There's no such thing as education in those circumstances. And I've come to the point where this is a community I've lived in now for 30 years, that I've interacted with for 30 years. We can't shop now in our community because of the tensions and pressures when we go into the shop to buy things, because we pass people who want irrigation that we're fighting against. Nobody in our community stood up and said anything about the demolition of ECAN. Now, when ECAN was taken away by Nick Smith, it was an affront to the rule of law, to natural justice, to the Bill of Rights, and to the Constitution. And the Law Society have spoken about it. Professor Philip Joseph has written about it. It is an affront to democracy. It's an ad hominem law. In a democracy, we should all be equal under the law, right? That's what we accept. But Canterbury is not. Canterbury has been singled out for a separate law. Well, that runs...
Well, we'll come back to that point just after that break.
Okay.
Welcome back, where I'm talking with Sam Mahon. Sam, let's go back to the Huronui Waiao Zone Committee, and there's a number of these committees all set up now right through Canterbury. The community's role is meant to be pivotal. Are you telling me that where is the community in these committees? I
don't know really if this is a straight impression or not, but it seems to me that in rural communities, there's a lot of leadership needed. That people are pretty well tied up with what they do, and when you go to meetings, it's always the same people who are leading the meetings. I think over the whole irrigation scheme that's been planned for our area, there's been 1 or 2 leaders, and everybody just follows along. And when I go to ask local farmers, how are you getting on with the irrigation group, or what have you heard from the zonal committee, they don't know. It's almost as if they don't want to know, or they don't care, or they're too busy. So we keep tabs on what's going on, we try to, but the locals don't. The locals are being led along, I think, and I don't really think that they know what's going to happen to them. When massive irrigation comes into our area, and I say when, I don't know whether it will or not. The economics are stacked against it at the moment. If it does, it'll change the community altogether. It'll turn it over. I said this to Nick Smith once in a meeting. If you get your grandiose irrigation schemes in place, you will turn small communities like mine into the engine room of the ship of state. Now, nobody wants to live in an engine room, Nick. And he said, Sam, it's for the public good. And that was always his answer to everything. It always finished, it's for the public good. I don't think the public realise what will happen to the communities. The community at the moment is very, very healthy. It's small, it's isolated, and when things are small and isolated, it's friendly. Well, if you get massive irrigation, first thing that happens is the locals, the local farmers, will sell their properties. Most of them will, because how could you not? Most sheep farmers don't want to convert to dairy. It's a whole different proposition. So what they'll do is their capital value will increase by 2 or 3 times. They'll retire and go down to drown in a cappuccino in Lake Wanaka. I don't know what they do when they leave our area, but something like that. So what we'll have is a whole bunch of people who come into our area who don't understand the land, who don't understand the landscape, who don't understand the history, who don't have the stories. And to my mind, that is the death of a community. It's not a good thing. It doesn't feed the community. That's what I'm afraid of.
So that's that balance you see between the economics and growth versus the environment. I mean, yeah. I always think it's an oxymoron. Why is it verse? The whole Canterbury water management strategy was meant to be about a balance.
Well, it's meant to be. A lot of things are written in to make things, look good, of course. In every marriage agreement, you have certain. I don't know this, but what I do whenever I look at a problem that I can't solve, because I'm not a mathematician, I'm an artist. I don't know data. I go to look where things have happened before. Now, I have friends in Switzerland. There's a lake we love there. They've got a wee cabin by the lake, and every few years I go over there and spend some time. The lake is 12 miles in perimeter. It's a beautiful glacial lake. It's dead. To stop it completely being covered over by algae, this purple algae called the blood of Burgundy. It's a beautiful, actually, plant, but the whole lake would be covered with it and eutrophied by it if it wasn't for the fact they have 3 pumping stations around this lake that pump air into it in the same way as they pump air into a goldfish to keep it alive. Now, they know why that lake has died. All across America, they know why rivers have died. 20 years ahead of us, they made all the mistakes we're making now. So,
what role? I mean, Huranui. I mean, they've set these zones up. Huranui, Waimakariri, and then you get right down to Tekapo and what have you. What role do you think the city, Christchurch City, the people in Christchurch City, on awareness and understanding? I mean, it's so distracted, and with good cause. I mean, these earthquakes. But water, as I said right at the beginning, was the big issue. Where is Christchurch City in protecting the rivers?
As you say, they're distracted. Most of the people who come and use the rivers, I would say, are from Christchurch. But they've been taking a real hammering, everybody. I think what's going to happen is that the places that we love, like Lake Sumner and the upper part of the Huranui, which is a gorgeous, should be left intact, that place, we will lose it if we're not very careful, if we're not incredibly vigilant. I will, as I've said, break any law to protect that land, because the laws that are being put in place by Nick Smith have been gerrymandered, and they're not good laws, and we are at fault if we obey bad law. This is Henry Thoreau's doctrine in his essay on civil disobedience. There are a lot of people who feel like I do, that words are... Brian Turner, when he was speaking at the Readers and Writers Festival once, I said, Brian, what happens when words aren't enough? And he said, you fight. And Nick doesn't get this, but eventually that's what's going to happen.
But I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Canterbury is poised. Canterbury is poised in a very difficult position. On one hand, all this consultation or engagement is going on with water at a time when the community is very, very busy and very stressed, actually dealing with matters more at home. Is there a risk in that?
It's a huge risk, and we feel we've tried to get a moratorium put on the development in the zonal committees. Dame Margaret Baisley won't have a word of it, neither will Nick, neither will our local mayor.
Why do you think that is?
Well, of course, it's easy play for them. Any obstruction...
For them or for...
It's easy play for them to carry on with their scheme, because the people who would be fighting it, most of the people who would be fighting that scheme don't come from our community, they come from town. And people would say, why from town? Because that land belongs to them and to their grandchildren, to all the unborn. Those rivers and lakes belong to us. They're our heritage, for God's sake. And sure, you know what it's like when people make submissions at ECAN or at Water Conservation or Water Hearings, and they say there is no room in this for emotion. You remember?
Yes.
We only
yes,
want
I do,
facts. Well, I was speaking to my local mayor the other day, and I blasphemed, and he told me off. I thought, aha, here's a weak point. He told me off because I had called down on God to support my point of view, right? I thought, that's an emotional point. I should have said to him, I don't want any emotion involved in this argument here. But we are all emotional. God, when our children go to a river and get sick, we get emotional, don't we? We don't just say they're sick, we get emotional. I think that's what's going to happen. 90% of the rivers in this country are polluted to some extent. Many of them have signs on the sides of the river saying that any bodily contact with this water is dangerous. Now, I heard our Prime Minister on Hard Talk on the BBC lie to the world about our environment. It makes me ashamed of us, really, and my community, that we have a man like that representing us. I feel ashamed of my community that I can't speak openly in my community about how I feel. I had a policeman turn up one day at my place after the ECAN protests. This man I'd known for 20 years. His wife was our midwife. I liked Brian a lot. He turned up in the police car, he climbed out with his blue livery on, and I said, "You want a cup of tea?" He said, "Sure." So I came downstairs, and I was just turning the pot around anti-clockwise 3 times, as we do. And suddenly, I said to him, "Are you here on business or pleasure?" He said, "That depends." He said, "David Carter is coming up to speak to the local farmers this evening. Are you going to be at the meeting?" I said, "No." He said, "In that case, pour me a cup of tea."
We'll just pause there with our cup of tea and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Sam, did you get arrested or did you continue with a cup of tea?
I would continue with a cup of tea. I had no plan to go to the meeting anyway because, again, it would have been a waste of time in a way. But it was strange to me because at ECAN, suddenly there was a security officer on patrol every time the commissioners were there. We'd been and tried to make a protest outside the Copthorne when Nick Smith was there. They had a ring of police, somebody got arrested. The young man jumped onto John Key's car, if you remember, and suddenly there was something happening. There was some life in the community again. And these protesters, they weren't long-haired radicals. They didn't have dreadlocks like your cameraman over here, no. They were actually mums and dads and middle-aged people. They're people my age. And I thought, yeah, this is good. This is healthy. This is good for us.
And then, of course, we've had the earthquakes. But I think it's important that we actually think about, you know, the bigger picture. One of the things that interests me is that how can we just look at our rivers in isolation away from their role on our coast and how our coasts are formed? Why are the mighty Hiranui? You know where they end up.
I know where they are. The base of the river isn't my area. My partner has walked the entire river on a bird count with Professor Ken Huey, as has Chris Todd, who also tried to stand for the zonal committee in our area. He's the head of Forest and Bird. But we have a lovely man.
Can I just go back to that? Do you think the reasons why yourself and Chris Todd did not get on to, with all, even Chris Todd's experience, was because you had both been so outspoken? Of
course, yeah. In fact, that was a suspicion of mine, but it was confirmed by the present mayor a few weeks ago when I asked him, and he said that Gary Jackson, the former mayor, had blocked that appointment, if you like. What I found nasty about that was that we were still allowed to go forward with our presentations and present our CVs and go to interviews, even though it had been decided before that we wouldn't be on the zonal committee. So in that way, of course, these things have been stacked. But that's what you expect with appointments. Nobody was voting for us. But going back to your story about the river, no, I don't know what happens to the river when it reaches the coast, but we have people who live on the coast, and they talk about, if you want to measure the health of a river, you go to the end of the river and you look what comes out the end of it. And they're seeing dead fish and dead eels and so forth. And the ecology of the coastline depends to a great deal on that fresh water. Now, there are professors of water studies at Canterbury University who can tell you that, or who could tell the zonal committee that if they were asked. Do you think that the impact that the dairy farming, and you also say intensification of development in Hiranui, but that you're looking around as you're driving through, the effect that that's having on the environment? The reason I got involved, yes. You know, everybody gets involved eventually for some personal reason, I suppose. Our local river, which is a tributary to the Hiranui, is only a quarter of an hour away. When we have classes, school groups coming to us to talk about art, they always say, where can we go for a picnic afterwards? I used to say down to the Waitohi River, and I can't now. It's gone. Just about 8 years ago, bang, it disappeared almost overnight. And it's not just my observation. I've interviewed people, and I've got documentation from people who've lived on that river all their lives who said the minute one dairy farm started its pumps, the water disappeared. They couldn't even have showers. It was that radical. And that river in which their children had played over the summer suddenly dried up. Then I talked to local farmers and say, hey, look, if we get a reservoir for water, can we let some of it go down the Waitohi, please, so we can get that river back? And they'll say to me, well, that river never ran, Sam. And that's the point when I get so angry that people could stand in front of me and lie to me or tell me that my memories are wrong or untrue.
Yeah, I mean, the word environmentalist has almost become a dirty word, isn't it? I mean, how do you feel about it? I mean, because I was going to introduce you as how do you feel about that? I mean...
Well, I don't think I'm an environmentalist. I used to fly microlights.
Yes.
I do terrible things with the environment. We run a foundry, for example. Yes. I'm not an environmentalist. I was given a parcel of property from my parents. I was given the mountains and the rivers from my parents, and I need to pass those on to my children, to my daughter and her children. What right have I got to destroy that heritage? It's a fundamental thing.
So when you travelled here today and you've got to go over a number of bridges that pass, what are your thoughts when you travel?
I always feel bad. Even when I go out running around our area, when I first went to live in Waikari in 1980, I'd go running and enjoy the landscape and enjoy the rivers. Now, wherever I go, I'm always thinking, what's under there? I mean, I know where all the dumps are in our area now. I mean, they talk about their Pua Dam having 245T in it. Of course, it's going to be a huge problem. If any reservoir is put in the Waitohi, they have to clean up the dumps first because they're full of farmers' dumps. There are places where I see water flowing through where there used to be old dumps. I know what's under the ground there. Now, this is the kind of information that gets lost when new people come in. All that has to be documented. Can know about these problems too, and nothing's been done.
So what would your legacy? What would you like to leave?
Documentation. The best I can do is to write it down.
Write it down?
So I interview whoever I can.
So you're working, is this something you're working on now?
Yeah, I've got another book that hopefully will come out in October, hopefully before the election. And what it is not my point of view, which is just my point of view. What I'm trying to do is get specialists from different angles looking at the same problem, because that seems to me the fairest way of doing this. So
you're documenting interviews of, and what sort of people? I mean, is it balanced? Is it, you know, because it's always two ways, isn't it?
I'd like it to be balanced, but many people will not be interviewed.
Many people won't be interviewed?
Well, I tried to interview the chair of the Hurunui Water Project. He said, no, I'm not going to be documented on a recorder, Sam, so we just have an informal interview. But John Ackland was one of the best. Anne Brow, who wrote the book on Who Owns the High Country, for example, and the way she uncovered the High Country Tenure Review rort, that's taken huge amounts of our land away from us and put it into private hands. Hers is one of the most riveting interviews I've ever done. It's an extraordinary thing. The most recent one was with Professor Philip Joseph on constitutional law and the effect that the ECAN Act has on the rule of law. Again, it was extraordinary to me. What was frightening at that point, if I can just tell you a very, very quick story, we may not have time.
Okay. 30 seconds.
Professor, well, when...
we're not going to have time on that, Sam. Because people will actually leave them something to read in the book.
Right.
And Sam, thank you for coming in today. Thank you for coming down from the Hurunui. And to the Canterbury community, this is going to be a series that I'm going to be doing on water that will be interspersed with one-on-ones about the earthquake. Thank you for joining me today.